Right. Well, thank you everyone who's here, and sorry for the slight delay. We were trying to give any latecomers a chance to come in. My name is Nalini Gulsran. I'm your presenter tonight. Tonight we're going to be talking about search engine optimization and how that works for your website, things you can do yourself. Some of this might sound technical, but my tip for this, particularly this class, is if you could take away one or two things, those alone will make a difference for your search engine optimization. I'm going to jump right into the presentation. Tonight's class is actually going to be mostly lecture. For those of you who've been to my classes before, you know that I also sometimes do demos, but tonight we're going to get mostly into lecture. If we have time at the end and we need to demo anything, I can do that. Feel free to use the chat box liberally. I always say this in my classes, and I will be answering the questions as I go. So let me just bring up the slides. Everybody can see that? If I get a thumbs up in the chat or in person? Good, awesome. All right. So let's first start with what is search engine optimization. We're then gonna get into, these are basically your 5 steps for how you use your search engine optimization. You've got to identify your keywords. You need to know what your ranking factors are, know how to use Google Search Console and Google Analytics, and then lastly, set up your Google My Business. Those are super high level, and we're going to get right into the details. So let's start with, what is search engine optimization? The layman's term question for that is, how do you get to #1 on Google rankings? Most businesses, that's what they're vying for. Everybody's trying to get on page 1, or they're trying to be #1, right? So how does it work? The first thing you want to do, your ultimate goal is you're trying to increase the quantity and quality of the traffic to your website through organic search engine results. And I say organic, that's why that's in bold. When you go to Google and you type in any search criteria, at the very top, there's usually 2 or 3, sometimes 4 or 5 paid advertising. And then you jump down to the organic search results, the results that show up naturally. And I'm putting that in air quotes because the reality is that if you're doing your SEO, is it really natural, right? Some people may argue that you're actually working on it, so it's not as organic as you think. But the idea is you really want to improve the quantity and the quality of the traffic to your website. So when people look for things, the first thing they want to know is, what is it? Where is it? What are other people saying about it? And so they usually go to Google, they ask Siri, they ask Google if they have an Android phone to search for things, and your SEO plays into all of that. Google is always crawling the internet and grabbing information about the content it's finding. So your website, whether or not you do all of this work, will automatically get categorized and indexed by Google. The reality is that could take a long time. You could be talking about, you built your website today and Google may not crawl it for a month or 2 months if you just think about the vast amount of information on the internet. By taking active steps with your SEO, you actually tell Google what you wanted to know. You're not leaving it to Google to guesstimate what is it that you want to display in the search results. And as I mentioned before, the information is indexed by Google. Google then takes that information and it feeds it into an algorithm, and then it spits out a response to your query. So when you type in marketing Stanford, Google takes that information, goes out to its library of information, and comes back with search results. And then lastly, there are a lot of factors that go into what your search engine algorithm is. Here's the thing. Nobody knows for sure exactly what the algorithm is in terms of what gives you more points versus others. What we do know is there's a lot of factors that add into it. Google's keeping that as a tight secret. So we don't actually know, if you were to think about SEO as a point system, do you get 5 points for this and 10 points for that? We don't know. All we know is there's positive points and negative points. So let's talk about those key steps for your SEO. So the first thing you want to do is identify your keywords in Google Trends. The second thing you want to do is configure your on-site and off-site SEO. Now, don't get tripped up there. We're actually going to go through some details around what's on-site, what's off-site, what are the different factors. I'm going to break all of that down for you tonight. You want to then configure your Google Analytics. You also want to submit your sitemap to the Google Search Console. This is the most important step for your SEO, but you need to do the first 3 steps before you get to this step. And I'll explain why as we go through. And then lastly, you want to set up your Google My Business if you actually have a business or a nonprofit. Whether or not you have a physical location, Google now allows you to set up a Google My Business account for a virtual business. Pre-pandemic, and I think late last year, they actually released the functionality. Prior to that, a business like myself that's totally virtual, I wasn't allowed to have a Google My Business listing, and now I can, and the location just says Stamford, Connecticut. Or some people just have United States. It just depends on what their target is. So let's talk about those Google Trends. What does that even mean? What is this? How do I use it? So Google Trends, you find it by trends.google.com. Just go to Google and type that in. And then what you want to do here is, in order to successfully use Google Trends, is you want to think like your customer and try to mimic their search patterns. Google Trends is actually spitting out results of real-time search queries, meaning, does people type in digital marketing Stanford, or are they typing in digital marketing Connecticut, digital marketing agency? I would have to try all those different combinations to see how they're successful or not, because sometimes we're guessing at what our keywords are, and Google Trends gives us an opportunity to not guess because you're actually seeing live results. So I'm going to show you what that means. Before we jump into the example, a couple other things to keep in mind are there alternative ways of saying the same thing that you're saying? As I just mentioned, digital marketing agency, digital marketing company. Those are all variations that people may be typing in that I might want to code for. Secondly, you want to find what are the related keywords. So for example, in my business, I do web development, I do website development, I do web design. Those are all the same thing, but those are 3 different related key terms that people might be searching for. And then lastly, knowing when your topic is relevant. So for my business, that's a lot less important, but for your business, let's say you're a flower shop. Certain keywords will trend during holidays. So for example, Mother's Day flowers will only trend during Mother's Day. So if you're going to put in a page or put in your keyword searches for Mother's Day flowers, for the other 11 months of the year, you might not see as much success as being found as a flower shop if you're only coding for Mother's Day flowers. But if you did things like anniversary gifts, birthday flowers, anniversary flowers, those are things that will allow you to expand your reach. And that's very important. It's because you want to think about all of the different ways people can find you. Any questions so far? Just checking the chat. Okay. So here's an example, a real life example that I put into Google Trends. So this was from, I did this in November of last year. So these results are changing regularly. You can see the date, right? November 18 to, which is going to be November 18 on the other side. So it's a 1-year view. And I get a lot of questions around what does the 100 mean versus the number. This is Google's index. It's actually a little unclear how they're getting this number, but Google has figured out of 100% of the time, this percentage of the time, the search criteria is relevant. Now you can see the search criteria that I used here was website developer and web developer. And look at the drastic difference in performance. Web developer is the red line, which is doing much better than website developer, which is the blue line. Now, what does that mean for me? That actually doesn't mean that I should not code my website to say website developer. What it means is that both of these terms are relevant, with web developer being more relevant, but I would try to find a way to fit both in because they're related terms and they're both performing. Sometimes what you'll see, because this is guesswork, right? The reality is it is guesswork, is that you'll put in a search criteria and you might see 0 performance. You'll actually see there's no data available, meaning that exact search phrase you used is not what people are typing in. And so then you have to try a different variation on that. So given that I have 2 search terms that are both relevant because they're both performing, I would use them both in just different places. So taking a deeper dive into what the comparison reports are. So when you go to Google Trends, this is literally scrolling down the page. I just took a screenshot of this section. You could see which parts of the United States the keywords are performing. Given that web developer is performing better than website developer, you can see more red on the map than blue. And this can be very important for businesses that are hyper local, where you're depending on, if you need your business to only be in Connecticut, you can actually make the map more restrictive so you don't see the sub-region as the entire United States, you're seeing it as the state. Just bear in mind that as you play with these reports and you get very specific, less data may be available. So it's really all up to Google and what's available. So just keep that in mind. Looking at the map a little further, so this is the breakdown of the website developer and web developer. If you notice, most of these, when you look at the related queries, are about salaries, about IT jobs, about programs. That's an indicator that maybe this keyword is geared towards employment and less so for small businesses and nonprofit. That doesn't mean I still won't use it. It just means that the quality of the lead that I get to my website may not be who I'm looking for, because people who are looking for jobs may find my website, but I'm not hiring. I'm actually hiring out myself. So things to keep in mind as you look at these reports. So let's get a little bit into your ranking factors. We talked earlier about that on-page and off-page SEO. What does that mean? How do I do it? This is the periodic table of SEO ranking factors. We're going to break down each of these verticals right now, so you don't have to feel confused looking at it, because it is confusing if you don't understand all of it. But just to repeat what I said earlier, in case anyone joined late, if you take away anything from this class, try to at least synthesize maybe one or two of these off-page or on-page ranking factors. Just implementing two of these can make such a difference on your website performance. So no single factor will guarantee your SEO ranking, engine ranking, right? What does that mean? That means that yes, you can do one of these, you can do two of these. There is no magic bullet for this. All of these things work in tandem, and all you can do is work on the little pieces of it. For example, if you have a great HTML title, and I'll explain that in a bit, but the content on the page is low quality, Google takes that into account. So keep in mind that Google is constantly reading your website. It's not just reading the titles, it is reading the titles plus the body plus the content. It's reading your footer, it's reading your header. It's reading pages that you may not even have published yet, because it exists in your website ecosystem. So all of that information is being aggregated together. Here's another example. Having many links won't help if they're low in quality. When we get into the blocking section of this, you'll learn about backlinking or backlink farming. I myself get a lot of emails for this. A lot of my clients do. There are companies out there that reach out and they say, we can help your SEO by we can do backlinking and link farming. Those are big no-nos in the SEO world, because Google has gotten smart and realized that, oh, you're linking out to 50 different websites, but none of them relate to what you're talking about, because Google's actually picking that up. It wants to know that if you're a flower shop and you're linking out to a math tutoring company, Google's going to go, those two things have nothing to do with each other. Why are they linking? And then that actually lowers your SEO. That's a very odd example, but it has happened before, where when you get backlinking and link farming, those type of things can happen. On the flip side, having several positive factors can increase your odds of success. So as I mentioned earlier, if you could take one or two of these things, maybe 3 or 4, and implement them, you'll start to see slow incremental changes. SEO is the longest return on your investment in terms of marketing, because you make your changes and you're going to wait for Google to index them, and then you're going to see how that performs, and then you're going to make more changes. It is a lengthy process that you have to have a lot of patience. If you make a change today, it may not reflect tomorrow. It may not reflect for 2 or 3 weeks. So let's break down that periodic table of elements. So if we start with the HTML vertical, we have your title tag. And I'm actually going to show you a screenshot of what this looks like momentarily. So just bear with me on the definitions. So your title tag is the descriptive title for each page of your website. So on my website, I have services. An example of making it descriptive could be services. Then we have the symbol is called a pipe. Most people recognize it as just a straight up and down line, and then followed by web development, services, web development, straight line, Stamford, Connecticut. Those are all keywords that matter to my business. And so I'm using that. And I'll show you that in an example in a moment. Then you have your meta description. So in Google, when you look up something, you have the name of the website, and then underneath it, you have a little paragraph blurb, either describing the website, describing the page, anything like that. Google will pull that information from your website to create that blurb, or you can tell Google. Whether you're using Wix, Squarespace, or WordPress, they all have the capability to tell Google both the title and the meta tag. So you don't have to let Google guess. You will actually tell Google, this is what I want to be displayed. And then when you talk about header tags, so header tags are what's actually on page in the actual section. So on a single website, let's go back to mine, we have services, and then we have one section that may say web development and a title tag, and then I have another one that says SEO in a title tag, and then another one that says social media in title tag. By putting them in title tags, you're indicating to Google that these are important information. These are headers, right? If you think about just the regular use of a Word document, you've got big bold font to tell you this is a headline. These title tags is telling Google the same thing, so Google can then match you with other people's search results. When we talk about architecture, again, these are on page, and architecture is basically how's your page laid out. Is your site crawlable? I mentioned earlier that you need to submit your sitemap to the Google Search Console. I'll actually take you through that in a little bit, where that is, how you get there. And what that's doing is the sitemap is a full list from your website that actually details out to Google. Here are all the links to the pages. Here are all the links to the images. Here are all the links to the documents, because all of that information is important to Google. And rather than waiting for Google to find it 1 month, 6 months from now, we're telling Google right now, here's what we have. And Google will incrementally index your sitemap. Even though you submit it one time, it will index it again whenever it realizes there's an update to the website. Your site speed matters, not just from a customer standpoint. When they click the button from Google or anywhere to get to your website, they want to get there right away. They don't want to wait 10 seconds for it to load. They want to wait 3 and maybe even less. And Google takes all of that into account, because if somebody clicks on a link and they go to your website and it takes too long to load, the reality is they leave. Most people don't stick around to see what the website actually says. So Google realizes by linking to a website that takes too long to load, they're sending people to a website that they may not want to go to. So they're trying to reduce the number of clicks for that user. So they move you down and they move someone else up whose website will load faster. That's one example of how SEO ranking factors can play. And then the next question is, are your URLs? So URLs are the www. name of your business / services, about us, things like that. Are they descriptive? Is there an opportunity to put keywords with your domain name or in your page URL? And I'm going to show you a real life example of what that means in a moment. So let's break that down. We just covered a whole lot of things. And this could be one of the most important things that you yourself can implement to improve your SEO. So here are some best practices for you. Number 1, rename all of your image files before you upload them to the website. Well, what does that mean? Most files, when you download them from the internet, from your phone, most times they look like this: image 1 2 3 4 5 6, bunch of characters, .jpeg. But here's an example of the same picture has been renamed to digital marketing Stanford CT.jpg. It's the same image. I've just changed the file name. Now I'm uploading it to my website, because that image 535 gibberish that goes on, Google is taking that in and saying, okay, this is not meaningful. But if Google takes in digital marketing Stanford CT, that's real information that it can use to feed to other users that are looking for your services. When I mentioned earlier what your URL structure is, here's an example. You've got your website, page ID 745, edit 1, or example test page 123. I can't tell you how often I've seen both of these on websites that I've rebuilt or helped to fix, because it's the default setting for a lot. The page ID 745 is particularly a default setting in WordPress. And for my technical users on the call, the permalinks is where you fix this. So Wix and Squarespace will default to the page name, whereas WordPress, oftentimes the base configuration has the permalink set up to page ID gibberish. And what you want to do is change it so that it does something like this. Same website, but the page is called services, or another page, which could be a blog title, is best practices for SEO. Those right there, best practices for SEO. That is 4 keywords, because the word for is actually a keyword in there. That's a keyword phrase that would be very impactful for my users if I had a web page that did that. So somebody Googling best practice for SEO will find that website or that page because it's very specifically laid out with a performing keyword. I mentioned earlier the title tags, and you're going to ask, what is that? Where is that? And in the diagram that you see on the right, you actually see the number 1. It says title tag. That is the title across your browser bar. It's what shows up in Google. And here are 2 examples of how you use your keywords in your title tag. So here I have Edge Space Marketing, pipe, digital marketing, pipe, Stamford, Connecticut. Another example is Edge Space Marketing, website builder, pipe, United States, because I'm trying to reach a national market, because I don't necessarily need to be local. But remember, my website has multiple pages, so different pages can have different variations on keywords, because you do want to be careful not to overuse keywords, because Google can then what's called shadow ban you for those words. Meaning if you overuse digital marketing, for example, and I use it on every page, on every picture, in every particular place possible, Google will then go, you're stuffing your keywords, and it can then decrease your ranking. So there is an art to balancing out what your keywords are and the variations on that. I do get this question often. So just for anyone who's wondering, where do I find the pipe symbol on my keyboard? On a traditional keyboard like mine, it is the key that is above your enter or return, and it is usually above the backslash. And so usually hit shift backslash to find that. And then lastly, use your keyword combinations in the alt tag of images. Now, in WordPress, that's easier to find. When you upload the image, there's actually a box that says alternative text, and that's where you would type in digital marketing, comma, digital marketing Stamford, comma, web development Stamford, comma, etc. Now you want to use maybe 3 per image, 3 combinations, and then use a different combination for the different images. All of this stuff is being indexed by Google, and all of this will help your ranking factors for specific keywords. WordPress and Wix, it's a little trickier to get to. You could do some Googling just to find where the alt text boxes are on those. But WordPress, it's very straightforward. Squarespace and Wix takes a little doing to find it. Let's talk about a little bit more of those ranking factors. So link quality. Google counts all the links pointing at websites, but they don't count them all equally. So what that means is that every website that points to your website counts, but is the website relevant? So for example, your Instagram points to your business page. That makes sense. Your Facebook points to your website. Also makes sense. Your local newspaper pointing to your website could make sense if you were featured or in an article, but let's go back to the flower shop and math tutor example. The flower shop pointing to the math tutor, Google's looking at the links going to this math tutor website wondering, how does that relate? And so that might not be a good quality link reference for that. Now you can't control who's pointing at you, but what you can control is who you are linking to. So when I build websites, I tag the bottom of all the websites designed by Edge Space Marketing with an outgoing link. Google's going to recognize a website that was built by a web designer in the footer. That's common practice. So no matter what the industry or the service is, although they seem disparate, the location of the tag and what it is Google will make that correlation because their AI has figured that part out. Another example is Google is also checking the words within a link. So if you think back to the description that I gave about the page IDs and the URLs and they matter, it's the same thing here. When you're linking out, like, so if you're a home care provider and you're linking to SWACA in the Connecticut area, you know, a link to one of their blogs that have keywords in it will help your SEO, because those keywords that are relevant for your business, although they're present on another business, will drive traffic to your website because Google's associating those keywords with your website. Let me say that again because it can be a little confusing. You have a home care business, you have linked to the SWACA website to a blog that has a very specific content. Google is taking that link, that outgoing link, and all the keywords in it and associating it with your website and giving you points so that you can improve your ranking in Google for those keywords. And then lastly, number of links. There's an old school of thought, because back in the day, it was very common to stuff your websites with lots of outgoing links, because Google counted if you have 50 outgoing links, if you have 5 outgoing links, and Google then quickly found that people were backlinking, link farming, link stuffing, and when we're getting around the rules and the links were not quality. So Google no longer really gives you credit for the number of outgoing links. Instead, it is looking for the quality of those outgoing links, meaning you're linking to a related business, a relevant business, those type of things. I'm just going to check the chat box really quick, see if we have any questions. Okay, nothing yet. All right, so let's look at the next vertical. This is the social vertical. Google is checking your social reputation. It wants to know that you are socially active. If you have an active social media account that is just linked to from your website, Google will make that correlation, and you were probably linked back to your website from social media. So Google's saying these two are related. And if you're active on social media, the better your website can perform, because all of that is related, is your digital footprint. So keep that in mind. So let me say that one more time. You have a static website, you may not blog, but you have a very active social media account, which is linked to your website, and vice versa, will help your social media ranking as well as your search engine optimization ranking. On both sides of the factor, you're going to improve your ranking protocols. Social shares. You can build up your network presence by sharing your content and other people's content. So for Facebook users, that's a business resharing other business information. For LinkedIn users, that's same thing. You can be sharing other people's posts. That's sharing and commenting on other business posts. All of that matters, and all of that gets included in your ranking. And both of these are what's considered the off-page ranking. As we mentioned, on-page and off-page. If you think of the previous factors as on-page because those are on the page, these are considered off-page because now we're behind the scenes and we're not actually on the website, specifically with these ones. Couple other things to keep in mind that add to your to your search engine optimization ranking is trust in the context of authority and history. Authority means Google has given you the authority in a particular vertical or expertise. So for example, my marketing website has been around for 3 years, and I brought these both on screen because they go together. The longer your website has been around, the more credit it's going to get. And so I've had that website for 3 years, it's been up for 3 years, and it has been validated by the amount of clicks, links going in, links coming out. I have an active social media presence, all of those factors. So I now have been given authority, meaning I'm ranking higher for specific keywords in my area. And history plays a big part to that. So a lot of times you'll get users that go, I want to rebuild my website, I want to rebrand, I want to start over. And you can do that. But when you do that, you lose all of your previous history that you've built up because it's a new URL, it's a new website. So in my case, I just rebuilt my website. I moved it from Wix to WordPress, but I kept the same domain name. And I did that because I want to keep all of the history and all of the SEO ranking factors that I've already built up with that. If I had changed it, so if you've already looked me up, you know it's edgespace.mktg.com, which is a little confusing. But now that I own Edgespace Marketing, if I change everything to marketing, I've lost all of my SEO factors. So I didn't do that. I just kept it as MKTG so I don't lose what I've already built up. And lastly, personalization. This is very important because Google is trying to personalize results for the end user. So this is a little less about you, but it's also about you in the sense of it's paying attention to where a user lives by country, by locality. Specifically, people are searching using the term near me, which is why it's important that you have your location, your vicinity, where you service, all of those things listed on your website or in your Google My Business so people can find you using the near me. So a lot of times people might say, hey Siri, find me ice cream near me. And using your GPS location, it's going to find those businesses. The next thing that Google is also looking at is your personal history, you as the end user. What have you been searching for? What do you tend to click on? What sites do you regularly visit? And it's taking all of that information and aggregating it against search results. Now, how that works in and what you can do, this isn't something you can control as a business person. All you can do is using Google Trends, figure out what is it people are searching for and code towards that so that Google can put the personal history of the searcher together with your keywords on your website. And then lastly, social. Again, the social media becomes a big part of this because Google is also checking what social account someone's more active on. I tend to be most active on Instagram, and I find that a lot of search results when I'm looking for things tend to come Instagram first, then Facebook, because Google has figured out that I spend more time on Instagram than Facebook. Violations. These are the no-nos. These are the things you want to be very conscious of when you're building a website. Is your website light on content? A lot of times I see one-page websites that are landing pages. They got a lot of great photos, but there's not a lot of information. And Google's qualifying the quantity, it's looking at the quality of your website. So as it's qualifying search results, it's actually looking at, is this website going to give somebody quality information, the information they're looking for? So if you don't have enough information on your website, it can work against you. On the flip side, if you have too much information on your website where it's very word heavy, that might not affect your SEO, that just might affect the user experience, and that's a different challenge. The next one is, have you overused your keywords? So I mentioned earlier, if I kept saying digital marketing, digital marketing, digital marketing on my website and not variate it, Google would eventually shadow ban me for that keyword, and I might not show up when someone's looking for digital marketing Stanford. Did you pay for backlinks or link farming? If you get that call or an email or a message to your website, delete it, ignore it, report it as spam because it's going to get you into trouble. If you go with backlinks or link farming, a lot of these folks are using the same links, the same farms, and you're going to end up on a list that Google's already aggregated because they know a lot of these places. Once they start seeing those links showing up, they're going to, not report you, but it's going to lower your ranking factor, and you don't want to do that. This one, the next two actually was a very common SEO practice when SEO first started becoming a commonplace activity and people were learning how to do it. They would stuff the page with keywords, meaning it doesn't have paragraphs, it doesn't have real language that someone can understand. It's just keyword after keyword after keyword. And they would do that to try to get Google to index the site, and then someone would come to it. But Google now, as I mentioned earlier, reads everything, and it wants to know that it's legible and easy to understand. The next thing that folks used to do was, like on my slide, I have a lot of white background. They would put text boxes with white text in it so it wouldn't show up to the user's eye, but it would show up to Google. Google's now gotten smart and is reading the HTML code to make sure that you're not doing things like that. And then lastly, is your page top heavy with ads? A lot of influencers and bloggers use this methodology. Newspapers do it as well, where they have ads that they've sold, and it takes up the top portion of the website, and it gets really hard to get to the actual content. Google factors that in because from a user experience, it's not great and users don't want to see that. So if you have a ton of ads on your website, move them further down. I don't know about you, but I read a lot of online news articles, and I've now noticed that when I'm reading my articles, there's ads in between the paragraphs, and people are doing that to get around the Google ranking factors of too much ads on top. So before we get into the analytics and search console, any questions on the periodic table of elements or SEO elements? Okay, nothing in the chat. So let's talk a little bit about analytics and the search console. This is where we're going to tell Google all about our website. So Google Analytics is free and it's easy to set up. They have very straightforward instructions for how to set it up. You can even Google, I have a Wix website, how do I do it? I have a Squarespace, I have a WordPress. These are all fairly straightforward to set up. They have step-by-step instructions. It is free for anyone with a Gmail account to sign up. The only caveat in this whole thing is that you need to have back-end access to your website or your hosting. Back-end meaning you can log in to edit. If you're using WordPress, you might need to make sure that you have administrator access. Although you can log in, you may be an editor or a subscriber, which wouldn't give you the full access you need to input the information. The reason you need that access is that Google wants to make sure that you have the rights to see this information. So like your competition can't just set up Google Analytics for you and then try to work around you, right? So you have to have access to your website to set up the Google Analytics, to give Google permission to read the website traffic, etc. And Google Analytics, what it does is that it's really used to measure your website's success. How often does someone come to your website? How much time are they spending on your website? How are they finding your website? What devices are they using to access your website? This has become particularly important now with the mobile era, but also with the pandemic. Most people, when they design websites, they're designing them on a desktop view, which is common practice. And they don't often look at what the mobile view looks like. And so sometimes the mobile view can have glitches and need to be reformatted so that it looks better on a mobile device. Something to keep in mind is different mobile devices render differently. I had this experience a couple weeks ago where I have an Android. I checked the website on my Android. I checked it on an iPhone 6. But my client had a different version of Android, and then another person had a different version of an iPhone, and the website had some glitches. So we had to modify it to make sure that we caught the different devices. Those things can work against you in your SEO, something to keep in mind. But with the pandemic, we're finding that more people are actually accessing websites right now via computers and via tablets. Why? Because we're home and we have access to our home computers and our tablets, whereas a lot of folks were in the office previously, and if they needed to look up, depending on their job, if they needed to look up something that was not job related, they needed to do it on their cell phone, or they were doing it in transit on the train or bus to and from work. Whereas now, most people are home, or they have been home for a longer period of time, so they're using the other devices available to them. But you wouldn't know that if you didn't have your analytics set up so you can see it. So here's an example of how your analytics could look. You'll see that this was a 7-day period last year. I had 17 users visit my website and generate 24 sessions. And I do get this question often. What is the disparity between the numbers? What that means is of the 17 users, one person or more people visited my website multiple times. So my website was visited 24 times by 17 people. That's how you read that number. The next number is your bounce rate. Now this number tends to be a little confusing. A bounce means somebody comes to your website and they left within 5 seconds. They did not click anything. They didn't go to another page. They didn't stay around for more than 5 seconds. And why would they do that? In some cases, your website took too long to load. In other cases, they may just be validating you and making sure that you exist as a business. You are a real business. That is very common. Other times they're simply looking for your address or your contact information, which is your email or your phone number, your hours, those type of things. If your website is designed well, is right on the homepage, easy for them to find, and they're happy and they've contacted you or found you, whatever they were looking for. So what you really want to look for with your bounce rate is a 70% or higher, 70% or lower bounce rate is better. So that means 62% is good. That means 40% of the time people stuck around. But look at my session duration, 2 minutes and 15 seconds. That's a really long time for a website. 2 minutes and 15 seconds from page load to poking around, to contacting me, to researching who I am, researching my services. But 2 minutes is also not a lot of time. So sometimes you'll see your bounce rate. If you're seeing 100% bounce rate, the session durations a lot of times tend to be 10 seconds or 15 seconds, meaning that user didn't stick around for a long time. Now you'll go, why? And a lot of that has to do with content. It's not what they're looking for. The website took too long. There's a lot of factors to look into once you get to that point. The next one is where you can see how I acquired my users. Now, I wish Google would use different colors because I myself sometimes have a hard time reading this graph because I can't match the colors exactly. But you can see from the dark blue sections, the darkest of the blues, I have pretty decent organic search results, right? On the 12th of whatever month this was November of last year. On the 12th, I had 5 people find me from Google, whereas on November 6th, it looked like 2 people did. Now you've got direct, social, and other. Direct means they typed in edgespacemktg.com in the browser, or they went to a bookmark that they had. That's what direct means. Social means that you found me from social media. So Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, you clicked on a link, Facebook, and you landed on my website. The other category could mean that you found it from a newsletter. So for many of you on this call, you registered for this class through the Darien Library, and you may have clicked on the link that took you to my website. That would categorize in this report as an other. Here we could also see what times of day your users are visiting your website. You could see what countries they're coming from. Depending on your business, this is important. For me, this isn't so important for my business, but I think for other businesses that are international, this could be important. If you needed to take down the website to do maintenance, the users by time of day report would be important because you don't want to be taking down the website during, your high traffic hours. In my case, it looks like Saturday nights at 6 p.m. is a good time to work on my website because no one's going to it, because Saturday night people are hanging out and watching movies. And then lastly, here's a report. Again, this is from November of last year. You could see 50% of my users, a little over 50%, are coming from the desktop, and 45% of them are coming from mobile devices. So about a year ago, it had a pretty even split. I think right now, last time I checked, it was actually skewed more towards desktop, as I mentioned, because of the pandemic. We can also see what pages are the most popular pages. So the single slash just means that's your home page. Then, lots of people went to the about page because they want to know who I am. I'm teaching classes. They're validating that I'm a real person. And then, of course, we've got the book online because I had my online calendar so people can book that way. And you can see I actually have a page called Search Engine Optimization and SEO. So if you were trying to find any of that, I've stuffed the keywords right in the URL so you can find it. There is a page value associated with it. That's important if you're getting into Google Ads and AdWords, because then they can tell you this is the value of that ad and things like that. I don't teach Google Ads or Google AdWords, so we'd have to find you an AdWords expert about that, but that's just so you know what that page value information means. Getting into the Search Console. So the Search Console is really where we tell Google the things about your website. This is what we mentioned earlier about how do I tell Google that I exist? I've set up my analytics, but I don't see my page index. Oftentimes it's because your Search Console was not yet set up. It's also free. You just need a Gmail account to sign in. And you also, again, need backend access to the website to verify that you have their authority to set this up. What do you use this for? You use this to monitor Google's ability to read your website. First and foremost, you're going to submit your sitemap. As I mentioned earlier, your sitemap is a list that you're going to give Google that indexes all of the pages, the URLs, the images. It is auto-generated by your platform. WordPress, Wix, Squarespace, they all have their own version of it. You can easily Google what's the WordPress sitemap, what it's called. You can find that information and submit it to Google. This is also telling Google, as it indexes your website, what keywords you're showing up for. And when I show you the report, you can see what those keywords are that I'm showing up for, well, at least a year ago, what I was showing up for. Another part of this is, does your website have errors? Sometimes Google will report that there's a crawlability error. It'll tell you things like text is too close, fonts are too small. There's a few different things Google will identify as your site having issues, and Google will tell you via email if this is set up. So here's an example of what that screenshot looks like from my Google Search Console. So this looks like a 3-month period. I had 84 total web search clicks, meaning of all of the times that I showed up in Google, 84 times my website was clicked on in that 3-month period. Here you can see that I have 14 valid pages and 1 page with error. Now that 1 page with error was a page that I renamed after I figured out my SEO keyword, but Google had already indexed it. So now Google's reporting that it was an error. It's not a bad thing. Google's just letting you know that there's a broken link somewhere or something that it previously indexed is no longer there. So if you're like me and you clean up your media library on your website, especially on WordPress, you upload pictures, you don't use them, and then you delete them later, you might get some errors if Google already indexed those photos because they no longer exist in your library. Also not a bad thing. It's just something for you to keep in mind if something that should be there is no longer there. So here's a little further breakdown of what that crawlability report looks like, that performance report. So earlier I mentioned I had 84 clicks in a 3-month period with a total of 8,000 impressions. So you're like, what does an impression mean? An impression means you showed up. So if somebody Googled in digital marketing agency Stanford, Edge-based marketing is there, but somebody didn't click it. So of the 8,000 times that I showed up, only 84 times it was clicked. That's kind of rough. That means that something's not quite right. Either I'm coded for the wrong keywords. As I mentioned earlier, website developer are job searches. So if you think about 8,000 times somebody was searching for a website developer job and they ended up on my website or they ended up seeing my website, that could account for that. Because remember, my Google Trends report told me that. It told me that most of the queries for web developer was for job searches, but I still coded my website for it anyway. And so I see this disparity. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it just gives you an idea of how you use these reports together. So here is a specific example from the same report of the queries that people searched for. So people searched for Edgespace and I showed up 112 times, if you see the impressions in the last column, but it was clicked on 11 times. People searched for SEO agency in Stanford, no clicks, but I did show up 436 times. So this is telling me that my keywords are working, but this is also telling me that perhaps my meta descriptions are not compelling enough. They didn't entice somebody to click on my website based on the description that they read. My keywords worked, so I showed up, but my meta description may not have been compelling enough to make them click it. Now, I'm particularly less concerned about this given my business model, but someone who's dependent on traffic to your website for conversions, you would want to take this report much more seriously than I am, looking at the impressions to the zeros. Here is where you add your sitemaps. When you're in your search console, on the left side of your screen, there's actually a button that says sitemap. And you can see here that I have submitted sitemap.xml. Sitemap.xml, that format that you see there is the Wix format for it. I know from experience that the WordPress format, because I've just moved my website, is site_map.xml. Now that's important because Google's going to be indexing a sitemap that no longer exists because I've moved my website. And so I want to make sure that when I'm done rebuilding my website, I submit a new sitemap. So if we were to go to a new report for my Google Search Console, you'll actually see 2 sitemaps in there, this old one and the new one. And the old one, where the status says success, might say error fetching. That's a common error that you see, or could not be indexed because it no longer exists. So just a quick recap. We covered how to identify your keywords in Google Trends. We covered how to configure on-site and off-site SEO. We also covered how to configure your Google Analytics. And then lastly, covered Google Search Console and specifically how to submit your sitemap to the Google Search Console. One thing I didn't cover here, and it's because a lot of times we run out of time based on questions, is setting up your Google My Business. Literally, you Google My Business. It's the same thing as Search Console and Analytics. You use a Gmail account to log in. You're going to submit your business information to Google, the name of your business, address, hours, phone number, email, and then you're going to get a page where Google's going to ask to validate your business. In this case, where I'm a virtual business, Google will mail a postcard to me, so I had to put my home address in. And then once I got that validation code, I can then enter it into Google My Business. And then there's a little box that you check that says, I am a virtual business, or people cannot visit me for products or services. And that's how you control your personal address, your home address from being displayed. Now, because of the pandemic, I've had a lot of clients complaining about the success of this, where they've put in all of their information and they're still waiting 2 and 3 months later for their validation postcard. And a lot of this has to do with Google themselves all working from home and may not have access to their printing facilities. But I have quite a few clients that have been waiting for their Google My Business postcard for the last couple months. So if you are in this boat where you do need to set this up, I recommend that you set it up sooner than later, and that you allow the period of time. Whenever it comes, you check on it once a month, ask for a new card, and you keep doing that until eventually they'll send you a card. All right, any questions? No? All right, well, thank you everyone. This has been great. I hope you got some useful information out of it. I hope that you found some takeaways. If you are interested in the slides, please feel free to email me. I am trying to find a way that I can transmit it to you so that you can download them. Because of all the graphics, it's a big file, so the email programs tend to bounce it. But please reach out and I will find a way to get you the slides so that you can have them.